BloodStream is a Belief original.
A 360-degree look
at the bleeding disorders community.
The developments, the history,
the news,
and the people who shaped our world.
BloodStream is brought to you by
the National Hemophilia Foundation
and created by Believe Limited.
Happy listening.
Hello and welcome to BloodStream, Episode 7, December 19th, 2016. I am Patrick James Lynch. On this episode, we'll review some recent headlines in our Trending Topics segment, take a deeper dive into a few stories, including some takeaways from the American Society of Hematology's 2016 annual meeting during our Like, Share, Comment segment. And during a special sit-down segment, we're going to hear from executive directors of patient organizations and chapters from around the country on what 2016 was and what 2017 could be, the good, the bad, and the otherwise. Plus, we'll give you a new way to help shape the future of the BloodStream podcast. All that more coming up on this episode. Welcome to BloodStream. You may have noticed in that opening teaser, you didn't hear the voice of BloodStream co-host Natalie Rose DeLillo. Unfortunately, we weren't able to align schedules to do this episode together, so it's just me today. Just back to our roots of my voice guiding you through this episode. But Natalie will be back with us for our regular January episode next month. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who continues to help spread the word about BloodStream. We continue to grow month after month with the number of people who are listening to our episodes, and that is in large part thanks to everybody who is sharing this content on social media, who is including it in email blasts, who is leaving us reviews on iTunes, which help index the BloodStream podcast. Please continue to do so. It is a free way to help support this podcast and ensure that we can continue to produce these for you. I also want to make you aware of a brand new way that you can help shape the future of the BloodStream podcast, and that is on our new feedback page. So if you go to bloodstreampod.com, you'll notice a new tab up there that says feedback. And it's just a few questions, a short little survey to help us determine what kind of content you want to hear about, because we create these month to month, which means if there is a flood of interest in a certain topic, we're going to be sure to cover that in the next episode. So if there's something that you think the bleeding disorders community isn't talking about enough, should be talking about more, should be looking at in a different angle or in a different way, this is your podcast. That is the point of us creating this. It's for you. So if you have topics that you would like to hear about on BloodStream, you can always email us, mailbag@bloodstreampod.com. You can shoot us a tweet at BloodStreamInfo, or you can directly shoot one my way at PJ Lynch. But now you can also go to the BloodStream website, bloodstreampod.com, fill out a short little feedback survey, and let us know what you want to hear. And finally, I also want to let you know that there are a lot of exciting things in the works for BloodStream, but none of which are 100% solidified right now, so can't quite talk about them. But as I did just mention, we are on Twitter. We also have our Facebook page, the BloodStream Podcast. I gave you my social handle as well. I would encourage you to stay engaged with BloodStream on social media, because as these exciting potentials start to crystallize and become reality, I want to let you know. I want to let you know about the cool stuff that's going on, because as I've said before, I think the podcast medium here is an important one, and I'm excited to continue to shape this so that it serves the bleeding disorders community very well. So keep an eye at BloodStream Info on Twitter, the BloodStream Podcast on Facebook, or follow me at PJ Lynch on Twitter for updates. Okay, and now let's get into our trending topics for December. Hemophilia News Today reports on an article titled Pain and Pain Management in Hemophilia that was recently published in the journal, and I'm probably going to butcher part of this name, Blood Coagulation and Fibrinolysis, he thinks. The article concludes that pain, while a key influence in a patient's overall quality of life, is very personal, both in how it's perceived and treated by a patient. So the Hemophilia News Today article essentially reiterates the accepted idea that pain's personal, management varies from person to person, and that people should be willing to adjust or adapt as needed, which is all true, if not uninspiring and well-accepted information. But the one point I do want to make about the article is that it does make specific reference to painkillers, and it doesn't make any reference to medical marijuana usage for pain. Now that medical marijuana is accepted in 28 states plus DC, so more than half the country, I think it's about time that it more frequently makes an appearance in conversations about pain management. This is an interesting story. It's out of the UK. DailyMail.com reports that a recent study suggests that while every year 30,000 women in England and Wales between the ages of 30 and 50 have a hysterectomy or an endometrial ablation to address heavy periods, as many as 20% of those women's heavy bleeding could be as a result of an undiagnosed blood disorder that, if treated, could normalize the bleeding and render that last resort of a hysterectomy unnecessary. The UK's National Institute for Healthcare Excellence provides a guideline for managing menorrhagia. However, the guideline doesn't include routine testing for blood clotting problems as a part of its protocol for women experiencing heavy bleeding. It does strike me as odd that if there are upwards of 6,000 of these 30,000 women, according to this study, who may just have an undiagnosed blood disorder, number one, that they should just be treating that to live healthier lives. Number two, as we know, inherited blood disorders are just that, inherited. They're genetic. If you have something in your family that's undiagnosed, it's really valuable information to know that. And number three, this surgery, it's considered a last resort, and it's unnecessary if treating the blood disorder does indeed normalize the bleeding. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes people diagnosed with bleeding disorders still experience extremely heavy bleeding and may choose this option. That's fine, that's your choice. But to not have as part of the guideline on menorrhagia getting screened for a routine blood disorder just seems to me a little odd. So we'll see if that changes, and we'll let you know if we find anything else. The journal Blood published a study examining patient-reported outcomes to assess quality of hemophilia care in North India's flagship medical center, the SMS Medical School. The study, which was supported in part by a grant from the World Federation of Hemophilia's Twinning Program, found 200 patients that met the inclusion criteria, and 86% of them reported satisfaction, which the study's authors have labeled as a success. I point this study out for three main reasons. Number one, it is a great example of international collaboration to improve services and analyze the patient experience. So because of the WFH's involvement, the patients in this study were able to receive factor, and the study was able to fill out 200 people in a study about hemophilia. If you look at clinical trials and studies along the way, often the numbers are quite small. So 200 people that fully met the criteria is actually pretty good. Number two is that India has the most number of known hemophilia patients of any country in the world, and this is the first quality assessment tool for the nation with the largest number of identified patients in the world. So there's some timely and historical significance to that. But the third reason that I point this study out is actually going further down the path of examining those numbers. According to WFH's data worldwide, there are 178,500 patients with hemophilia. But let's look at the math. If hemophilia occurs in approximately 1 in 10,000 births, and the Population Reference Bureau estimates that there are roughly 7.3 billion people worldwide, then mathematically there should be about 730,000 people with hemophilia. But we only know about 178,500. Why? Well, because there's still such a lack of access to care around the world, and that lack of access to care means we're also not diagnosing people around the world and don't have the structure to support them, so we just don't even know about them. I like looking at Nigeria as an example of this. The population in Nigeria is about 173 million, so mathematically that means there are about 17,300 hemophiliacs. January is the last time that I checked in with the Hemophilia Foundation of Nigeria founder, Megan Aditiran. And she is a bull of a human being. She just gets stuff done. She is a titan. For all her work, for all her energy, when I asked her in January how many people in Nigeria were known with hemophilia, 235 out of 17,300. So we have a long way to go. And lastly, in our trending topics segment, NHF's Medical and Scientific Advisory Council, or MASAC, released 4 new documents last month with recommendations on the following: the treatment of von Willebrand disease, the management of girls and women with bleeding disorders, the treatment of hepatitis C in people with hemophilia and other bleeding disorders, and products licensed for the treatment of hemophilia and other bleeding disorders. Be forewarned, though, some of the recommendations are quite dense. But if any of those 4 categories apply or are of interest to you, I would recommend setting aside some time to read through them. Links to the MASAC recommendations, along with links to all of our trending topic stories, can be found in the program notes in your podcast player right now, or on the episode 7 page on BloodStreamPod.com. Up Next, in our Like, Share, Comment segment, My Life, Our Future reaches 5,000 patients. What is My Life, Our Future, and why is that significant? We'll discuss. The National AIDS Memorial Grove honors the hemophilia community in a touching ceremony on World AIDS Day. I was honored to be involved with that, and we will get into all of what that was about. And we'll provide you with a recap of some of the major headlines and announcements from the American Society of Hematology's annual meeting, which took place earlier this month in San Diego, California. Then later in our sit-down segment, we'll hear from executive directors of patient organizations from around the country on what the highs and lows of 2016 were, what the hopes and expectations for 2017 are, and more. All that and more is still to come, but first, a quick word from one of our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Stop the Bleeding. Stop the Bleeding is a comedic mockumentary web series about a dysfunctional bleeding disorders nonprofit organization. The cast of goofy characters tries to do good in the community and usually succeeds by accident. I may be a little biased as the show's creator, head writer, and star, but I do think it does a pretty good job of using comedy and narrative content to tell some important stories about what it means to live in the world of bleeding disorders. You can check out all 29 episodes, including our most recent 8 episodes from our season at Camp I Don't Wanna Bleed, by visiting stbhemo.com. That's stbhemo.com. Kicking off our Like, Share, Comment segment is our Like story for the month on My Life, Our Future enrolling 5,000 people. So, to go back, My Life, Our Future is a nationwide campaign for progress in hemophilia. The campaign is a partnership between the American Thrombosis and Hemostasis Network, Bloodworks Northwest, the National Hemophilia Foundation, and Biogen. My Life, Our Future was created to help reveal the genetic information of people with hemophilia so that physicians may better individualize the care of people with hemophilia as well as uncover data that will advance how to treat it in the future. At NHF's 64th annual meeting in November of 2012, NHF CEO Val Bias announced the launch of My Life, Our Future. It began as a pilot program, and free or low-cost genotyping analysis became available at 11 different hemophilia treatment centers around the country. Following the success of that pilot, the rollout of My Life, Our Future was then announced in October 2013, and the number of HTCs that now offer free genotyping has been growing ever since. The process of genotyping is used to better understand the present generation of people with hemophilia, as well as what it may look like in the future, and thus how to best treat it. Genotype is the genetic makeup of an individual, and genotyping is the investigation of this genetic constitution. So in the case of My Life, Our Future, genotyping is the process of identifying the genetic code responsible for an individual's hemophilia. In hemophilia, genotyping requires analyzing the DNA sequence of either the factor VIII gene for people with hemophilia A or factor IX gene for people with hemophilia B. And this is pretty interesting. Genotyping is especially valuable in hemophilia due to the large number of mutations associated with the bleeding disorder. So in many other genetic disorders, one mutation is always or most often responsible for its cause. But in hemophilia, there are more than 2,500 identified mutations for hemophilia A and more than 1,000 identified mutations for hemophilia B. The information that can be found through genotyping allows doctors and researchers to better understand a family's specific mutation, provide more information on bleeding severity, and offer clues to inhibitor risk. Tests can also identify carriers, aid in early family planning, and potentially improve childbirth and post-delivery processes and outcomes. My Life, Our Future is the first program to make a free genotype testing widely available to people with hemophilia A and B in the United States. And while genotyping is part of standard care in many other developed countries, that is not necessarily the case here in the United States. And it is mostly due, in the opinion of many, to cost and insurance coverage boundaries. But this past month, the My Life, Our Future initiative victoriously achieved the goal of enrolling 5,000 people into the My Life, Our Future research repository. This achievement made the research repository the largest resource of its kind in the world. The data collected from the research repository will begin to be put into use in 2017. Qualified researchers will apply to study the data and thus gain knowledge about hemophilia care and treatment. These expected breakthroughs will help researchers and clinicians better understand the relationship between the genetic cause of hemophilia and clinical outcomes. So, My Life, Our Future has been discussed now for the last number of years. It was a major initiative that Athen and Biogen and NHF embarked on a few years ago, and it has crossed this milestone that has been anticipated for quite some time. So congratulations to us, to those of us in this community for supporting this effort. I think this is just my layman's opinion, we will see some of the benefit. We will not see the lion's share of it. I have a sneaking suspicion that the true value of this kind of aggregate data center for qualified researchers will be seen in generations to come. But to know that we had a role in that is extraordinary, and it reinforces that idea that we are a community that needs to serve the greater community. And in the short run, we are going to benefit from having this kind of genetic data available for research. We are giving researchers the opportunity now to look even more specifically at what causes hemophilia A and B, which means we can know more specifically what we can do to treat it and perhaps to cure it. You can find out more about My Life, Our Future if you follow the links in the program notes or the episode description for episode 7 at bloodstreampod.com. And now for our share story this month, the American Society of Hematology's 2016 annual meeting. Just before I dive into these updates, I want to say a few quick things. ASH, their conference, it's very medical, clinical, biopharma oriented. So unlike, say, NHF's annual meeting, unlike HFA's annual symposium, or even WFH's biannual World Congress, which does lean very heavy toward medical and clinical, the audience for ASH is not the patient, it's the professionals at a very high level. So the presentations that occur at ASH, and therefore the articles and reports that come after it, are very much so about treatment procedures and products, current studies, products in the pipeline, clinical trials, etc. So the list I'm about to go down, it's a lot about companies and products that are available for people with hemophilia. And I think it's important. I know it can get so boring. I openly accept it does not make the best podcast material to just run down a list of companies and products and statistics. It's so easy to gloss over that. It is more challenging than ever to be well informed because we have never had this many companies interested in us. We have never had this many products available for us. We have never had this many different classes of products to consider. Plasma and recombinant, now we have all these non-factor replacement therapies and gene therapies. There's a lot to think about. It's gonna not always be the most interesting and fun stuff, but we gotta stay informed. We gotta keep up with the curve. So this is my effort through BloodStream to help keep everyone as informed as possible. So I'm gonna go down my list here of the headlines and the stories that caught my eye out of ASH. I'm sure there are some of relevance that are not here. I would encourage you to follow the links in the program notes so that you can do more reading on your own, but this is the stuff that caught my eye that I think you need to know about, and here we go. Alnylam Pharmaceuticals presented interim results from Part D of its ongoing Phase 1 study of fitusiran in patients with hemophilia A or B who also have inhibitors. The data presented showed that once-monthly subcutaneous administration of fitusiran resulted in a median annual bleed rate of 0. The company plans to initiate their Phase 3 study in early 2017. CSL Behring's Idelvion, a long-acting recombinant product for treating hemophilia B, presented encouraging Phase 3 trial results. Idelvion is the first and only Factor IX therapy with up to 14-day dosing for routine prophylaxis in appropriate hemophilia B patients. And I will take this moment to point out that if you are a person with hemophilia B, this is a particularly interesting time for you. There's a lot going on right now with hemophilia B because in part it is a less complex factor protein. So you do see advancements in Factor IX often before you do in Factor VIII. And that is my layman's way of explaining that. NovoNordisk presented data from their SMART-7 study, which found that Novo-7 resolved 96.5% of bleeds when treatment was given within 1 hour of the bleed's onset. So a bleed starts, if you get Novo in there within 1 hour, from this data, 96.5% of the time, that bleed is resolved. All right, moving on. Sangamo Biosciences Incorporated announced the presentation of data on SB525, the company's gene therapy program for hemophilia A. According to their press release, a single intravenous administration of SB525 results in the production of significant levels of factor VIII in mice and non-human primates, and correction of the bleeding defect in a mouse model of hemophilia A. So in these animals, factor VIII levels ranged from 5% at the lowest dose to 230% at the highest, and these percentages could be therapeutically significant if they can be replicated in humans with hemophilia A. So right now, just mice and non-human primates, if it can be replicated, those numbers would be very, very encouraging. SPARC Therapeutics reported preliminary results from their ongoing study of their investigational agent SPK9001. It's a form of gene therapy intended to treat people with hemophilia B. According to the data, 9 patients achieved and maintained a threshold level of factor during 52 weeks of follow-up without any bleeding or, and this is the part that got me paying attention, or need for factor IX, quote, rescue therapy. So in other words, these 9 patients, they took this therapy, they went for a year, so a cumulative 1,650 days, without any bleeding and without the need for any more treatment of hemophilia B. That is exciting. Next up, scientists from the University of Pennsylvania reported curing mice, and that's the word they used, curing mice with hemophilia B using the gene editing technique CRISPR. We've been hearing a lot about it. We'll probably continue to hear a decent amount about it. And CRISPR is intended to repair the defective genes in factor IX that cause hemophilia B. And while the research on how to apply this technique to humans is still in very early stages, Dr. Lily Wang, who is the lead author on the paper that was presented at ASH, she pointed out that this breakthrough does actually show that, quote, in vivo genome editing can cure disease. So even though it's only in mice, they've now proven that in vivo genome editing can actually cure disease. That's exciting. And finally, this announcement, in fairness, was made just prior to the commencement of ASH, but I'm tacking it on here at the end because I think it's interesting and it kind of fits the product development section of BloodStream, as it were. Octa Pharma announced recently through Hemophilia News Today, at least that's where I saw the article, that it is launching 2 clinical trials evaluating the success of treating people with hemophilia A using Wilate, the company's coagulation product that is currently FDA approved for treating people with von Willebrand disease. But now 2 trials are investigating its utility and success in treating people with hemophilia A as well. So, if you would like to know more about any of that, any of these stories, any of these updates, you can follow the links in the program notes or in the episode 7 description at bloodstreampod.com, including, we have links there to recaps from ASH, as well as links to the individual stories that were mentioned here. Check out your program notes to learn more. And now rounding out our like, share, comment segment, our comment story for this month, on December 1st, the National AIDS Memorial Grove held their annual World AIDS Day observance ceremony. The Grove's Unsung Hero Award was presented this year to BloodStream Episode 5 guest Jeannie White-Ginder, who accepted on behalf of the hemophilia community. In addition to her being there, NHF CEO Val Bias, HFA CEO Kimberly Hogstad, and COT President Carl Wexler, along with other community leaders, were also on hand for this historic moment. According to CDC data, approximately 90% of people with severe hemophilia A contracted HIV and/or hepatitis C between the late 70s and the late 80s. For many years, there has been a call for a monument to recognize the crisis or Holocaust that was experienced by the hemophilia community during this time. The National AIDS Memorial Grove, in addition to presenting the hemophilia community with the Unsung Hero Award, also unveiled plans for what they call a seated crescent, which will be a monument to memorialize the hemophilia community's unique role, albeit unintended, in identifying HIV/AIDS as a bloodborne virus and disease. In a letter that was circulated in the last couple of days, NHF CEO Val Bias recognized the importance of this day, World AIDS Day 2016, the importance of this monument being established. He also recognized that while HFA and NHF have put up a substantial amount of money to get this monument started, there are still funds needed to complete its sustainability. And there has been a call for a second monument that would potentially live somewhere on the East Coast or at the very least outside of a pre-existing memorial such as the National AIDS Grove. In the letter I just referenced, NHF's CEO Val Bias did acknowledge that NHF would be willing to work with HFA and COT not only on raising the additional funds necessary for the monument in the AIDS Memorial Grove, but also on raising the funds for a second monument if that is to move forward. As I mentioned, I believe in the last episode, Believe Limited was present at the AIDS Memorial Grove, which we discussed on episode 5 with guest Jeannie White-Ginder, to produce and record a conversation, one of our Powering Through conversations, featuring Val Bias, Kimberly Hogstad, Carl Wexler, and John Cunningham from NHF, HFA, COT, and the Grove, respectively. We released within about, 16 hours or something, our live edit of that recorded conversation. It was referenced in Val's letter, and it was also circulated in numerous email blasts that I've seen from various chapters and entities in our community. I would highly recommend going to poweringthrough.org. There is a video on the landing page that automatically plays when you go there. It is the YouTube video of this conversation between these four leaders that I moderated with a very gentle touch. It was really about hearing from them and not hearing from me. My comment on this story is fairly simple, and that is to express that I'm honored to have been a part of World AIDS Day 2016 at the Grove. I feel privileged to belong to a community that has gone through such extraordinary challenges and has found a way forward, and to have the leaders of our various national organizations up on stage with John Cunningham, the executive director of the federally supported AIDS memorial in the country, speaking about the pain, the process of healing, and how we take what we've learned as a patient group and as advocates from these devastating times into the way that we prepare for our future. It just feels remarkable to belong to a group that has that willingness and that understanding that we are better off working together to make sure that the pain that we experience in our past doesn't have to be a part of our future. The hemophilia community remains a watchdog of the blood supply. And to simply think that nothing like the contamination crisis could happen ever again is foolish. It's wrong. It could. We have to continue to be vigilant. We have to continue to be smart. And we have to continue to stay informed and be empowered, which is why that share story about all these different presentations during ASH, it might not be the most interesting content in the history of BloodStream, but I do think it's important that we continue to just stay aware, and I see what took place on December 1st of this year as an excellent example of coming together to discuss our community's darkest days and how we come out of that, not with unending bitterness and not with unending anger and sadness. Of course, there is an element of that will always be present for some, and rightfully so, but with a sense of purpose and a sense of forward-looking. So I want to thank, again, Val Bias, Kimberly Hogstad, Carl Wexler, and John Cunningham for participating in the Powering Through conversation as a part of World AIDS Day 2016 at the Grove. I do highly encourage you to go to poweringthrough.org to watch that video. If you're listening to this many months later and it's no longer on the landing page, just go to past events and look for the Grove. You will find it. And I am encouraged moving into 2017, a year where I think days like Advocacy Days, Washington Days, our National Advocacy Day in DC, our state advocacy days that take place all throughout the calendar year, these are going to be particularly important days as the Affordable Care Act is under threat. And 30 million Americans, including those of us with chronic diseases, need to reconcile that. So I'm encouraged by the coming together of these organizations and the sense of looking forward to how we continue to learn lessons and advocate as a unit. Coming up, executive directors from around the country lend their perspective on what 2016 was and what 2017 could be. That is next, right after this word from one of our sponsors. Once again, this episode of BloodStream is brought to you by Stop the Bleeding. Now, I accept you've been busy listening to everything we have to say here on BloodStream and you haven't had a chance to go to stbhemo.com yet. That's fine, you're still hanging out with us, we understand that. But once you are done with BloodStream today, head over to stbhemo.com to check out the hilarious and award-winning comedic web series about bleeding disorders. And in just a couple of weeks, we will be releasing our most recent season, season 6, all 8 episodes entirely in Spanish as well. So head over to stbhemo.com to check out what my mom calls her favorite web series. This month's sit-down segment is produced and presented by my partner at Believe Limited, Ryan Gielen. Ryan was the one who was hopping on the phones to talk to the various executive directors about the year behind us and the year ahead of us. So he's going to be leading us through this next segment where we get to hear those insights for ourselves. So without further ado, I turn the podcast over to Mr. Ryan Gielen.
So, if you could just say who you are and what chapter you represent.
This is Jeremy Griffin, Executive Director of the New York City Hemophilia chapter.
So, Jeremy, what would you say were some of your chapter's greatest successes in 2016?
I would say one of the biggest successes we had in 2016 is we set up a 3-year strategic plan and identified 5 areas that were underserved in our population, and VWD was one of the areas that, as a chapter, we weren't doing enough for. And we hosted our first VWD overnight retreat. Additionally, one of the big things that was a huge success for us was sending our board to the World Congress. I think it was important for us to have community representatives at World Congress to hear what it's like for other people around the world that are living with hemophilia that don't have the same access that we have. With it here in the U.S., it was a way for us to affordably send people to hear those stories and make those connections in real life, face to face.
So what would you say were some of your greatest challenges in 2016?
This year we changed executive directors. So that is a big challenge whenever you have an organization that has been successful and has been growing on a regular basis. How do you maintain that momentum with a change in leadership? And I think we made the transition well, but it was definitely, an iffy place to be, as an organization.
And looking ahead to 2017, what are you most excited about?
When I think about challenges that we potentially are going to face, I think it is going to become more and more a priority for us to get our voices heard. And at a local level, I would like to have more of my families locally involved with that advocacy conversation and making sure that they're telling their stories both on the state level and also nationally.
I think that's super interesting. So a couple times now, in a couple of these answers, you've mentioned the need to tell stories. Why are you coming back to the theme of we need to tell our story?
We are a community. They shared a story. That story motivated people, and it grew from there. And so I feel strongly that the stories we tell and the stories as a community, it's what we rally around. It's what connects us.
I think that's such an amazing point, and I can definitely see the value of it when it comes to advocacy, especially when you're telling stories to other people in your community. They can access the similarities in their life because they're coming from the bleeding disorders community as well. But when you go to advocate, a lot of times you're talking to people who have no awareness of hemophilia. So I just thought that was so interesting. Like, how else are you going to reach them? You have to tap into that shared humanity through the story.
Exactly. I mean, most people have spent time on the phone with an insurance agent trying to navigate a problem, trying to get what they need. That's a common experience that people can relate to. But if you tell that story to someone, they may not understand why they need the medicine. They may not understand the technicalities related to why this medicine is important for bleeding disorders, but they can understand that common frustration. I think that's what stories do, is it brings it down to that common level that you can relate to.
From your experience as a leader in your chapter, what's one thing you wish the greater U.S. bleeding disorders community would be aware of or could help with?
If we are going to be effective as organizations, advocates, or whatever, the best way we can do it is unify as a community. When you look back at the history of how advocacy has been effective for this community, it's when we've all come together and had one voice.
There's this tremendous amount of effort, but one thing that we notice a lot is that there's not as much money or time available to communicate about all the things that you're doing and all the opportunities for community members. What is sort of your 2017 communication mission, I guess, for your chapter?
I was up at a meeting with 600 other chapter executive directors. We all realized, we need to communicate better. We really need to talk to each other more. Someone said, why don't we start one of those Facebook groups, the secret Facebook groups with just us? The more we can share information, the more we can have that level of platform that anybody can talk and we can ask questions quickly of each other and share resources, the better the community is going to be served. On another level, locally, we've seen a lot of success with live Facebook feeds. As a group, if you're using that live feed right now as it exists, then more of your people are going to see that message than if you just posted, just based on how their algorithm works now. The other thing that we're considering, and this is kind of maybe going back a step, is I'm looking at having options for people to receive updates on what's coming up through text messages so that it doesn't get in the clutter of a regular email inbox.
I think that's so smart. I think that's the future. And I think that's how it has to be. If you've been in the community 20 years, texting started when you were 10 years into how the community was already communicating with you. But if you're new to the community, you are so comfortable with texting and signing up for text alerts and push notifications from apps. It just seems very, very smart to move in that direction, or at least to consider it. All right. So if you don't mind, say your name and your chapter.
My name is Rich Pizzillo, and I'm the Executive Director of the New England Hemophilia Association.
Awesome. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So what were some of your chapter's greatest successes in 2016?
Each year we host a family camp for families throughout New England with a bleeding disorder, and in 2016 we had our largest camp yet with over 250 individuals. I was reminded as a new leader in this chapter of how special camp is, especially a family camp, simply because it allows families to be with their kids and teenagers to come back and young adults to kind of have that hallmark around self-infusion.
How long have you been at NEHA? You mentioned that you are a new executive director. How long have you been there?
I have been here for 7 months.
What was sort of your biggest surprise starting out?
Yeah, I would say that my biggest surprise was how active folks are here in the community and are willing to travel 3-4 hours to be at events.
So as a new chapter ED, what is sort of the greatest challenge that you think your chapter faces, and was it a surprise to you?
When I first came on board, there was a big black hole, and that was advocacy. So what we did, which goes into an accomplishment as well, but is also a challenge, is we established a new bleeding disorder advocacy coalition. And our goal for next year is to continue on holding smaller advocacy events throughout New England and each state. So I think that our biggest challenge, especially with the unknowns of the election and what the new administration is going to do in terms regarding healthcare, if we put that aside, we still have the major issue here in New England of working across state lines and making sure that everyone is educated and informed on what to do in case there was a major issue.
Everyone's response seems to be that the community needs more formalized, better, more rigorous, more modern communication. And it sounds like you've kind of noticed that as well and are taking steps toward that.
Yeah. We've gotten a lot of questions from community members on what we need to be doing, and we don't want to go back to where we were. But I'm a strong believer in doing it together and making sure that we're following the lead with NHF and HFA, because the federal issues, especially with something like this, will come down to a state level as well. I think a positive of what this is really going to do is force not just the bleeding disorder community to unite and have one voice, but all chronic condition communities to really come together here.
Last question. What would you like to see the community as a whole focus more on in 2017?
Although, yes, we have access and our programs are continuing to grow and everyone is finding them educational and fun, at the same time, we can't forget about that bigger picture, that there's blood brothers and blood sisters out there in developing worlds that don't have access to treatment. And never mind insurance cards, just don't have access to treatment, period.
Hey, sorry to interrupt the sit-down segment here, but I just got to talk to you for a brief moment about one of our sponsors, Entertainment to Affect Change. Entertainment to Affect Change is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to creating impactful and educational photo, video, film, and audio content that leads to positive change in the world. Entertainment to Effect Change, or E2AC, has helped bring this podcast to life by partnering with Believe Limited to make BloodStream a reality. But E2AC does more than just podcasts. Check out e2ac.org to learn more about the breadth of work the organization is committed to. E2AC, entertaining to effect change. BloodStream would once again like to recognize Stop the Bleeding. Stop the Bleeding, the comedic web series about bleeding disorders that uses entertainment and digital content to educate and empower our community. You can find all of the episodes and our additional content, such as the behind-the-scenes videos and our unique STB activity book, by visiting our website, stbhemo.com. That's S for Samuel, T for Thomas, B for Bravo, Hemo for Hemophilia, stbhemo.com.
So the first thing that I would love for you to do, if you wouldn't mind, just say your name and the chapter you represent so that when people hear your voice, they can associate it with you.
Sure. This is Michelle Kim. I'm the Executive Director of the Hemophilia Foundation of Southern California.
So Michelle, what were some of your chapter's greatest successes in 2016?
My favorite event, I think I'd have to say, was a very new program called our Teen Leadership Summit, and that's where we brought 6 teens into our office. We gave them training on resume writing, career planning, interviewing skills. The best part of that week was when the teens met with one of our local assemblymen, and he was convinced by them to vote yes on the bill, which was then signed by Governor Brown in September of 2016.
I'm hearing more and more about the efforts to bring community members and young people into advocacy. And I think your program that you described, that feels like a pretty bold new approach to getting young people involved. Would you mind describing a little bit about how you came up with that, what the inspiration for it was?
I see some of these teens and I see so much potential and so much they can do, but they're not given the opportunity. And so after our program, they were filled with so much self-esteem, so much excitement, so much of a can-do attitude. I really feel like they learned so much of things that they wouldn't otherwise receive. I'm really excited for them, and I'm really excited to see where they're going.
So you're describing a really innovative approach to getting young people involved in advocacy on the local level. What do you think in 2017 the community needs to do to better advocate for itself?
I think one of the concerns that I have is on an immigration front. Sending someone back to a developing country who has a bleeding disorder, back to a country that has no clotting factor, really is more of a human rights issue. And so that's one thing that we really want to look into and tackle and see if we could make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen here in California.
On a more positive note, looking ahead, what are you most excited about for your chapter in 2017?
Well, one of the things that I'm really excited about is a collaborative effort that the California foundations are putting together. We're planning that for September of 2017, and I think it will be just the beginning of our statewide collaborative efforts.
I'm picking up on a theme of coming together and unity and joining forces. Is that a sort of a conscious effort on your part to kind of unite groups to have more power? Or is that sort of just where you're ending up?
I think for us, it's a purposeful direction that we'd like to take. I think it's something that we need to keep doing to move forward.
That makes a lot of sense, and it certainly echoes stuff we're hearing from around the country. One sort of big final question, what would you like to see in general? What would 2017 look like in the best of all worlds?
I do think that people need to be prepared for advocacy whether they want to or not. That's where the foundations can provide training and opportunity. I think the final thing I'd just like to say is we celebrated World Hemophilia Day, but to me, it's not really a celebration when 95% of the world's bleeding disorder population is not getting access to medication that could allow them to live normal and fulfilled lives. So I think that there is an obligation on us in this country to somehow make a change and effort to reach those people.
Every single ED we've spoken to for this and for just in general in passing is talking about the need to pay more attention, to have more empathy for, and take more action for the bleeding disorders community around the world because of the disparity in care. So that sentiment is echoed and pretty wide.
For me, it's really hard to wrap my head around the fact that we're talking about gene therapy cures for our folks here in the States, and yet I personally get phone calls and Facebook requests from people who have nothing to treat their bleeds. And it just breaks my heart, and I feel like we have an obligation to do something about that.
I think a lot of people will be really moved and will agree with that and second that call to action. Thank you for your time, Michelle.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. I love what you guys are doing.
Thanks for doing this. If you wouldn't mind, just start by saying your name and the chapter you represent.
My name is Bob Robinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Bleeding Disorders Alliance, Illinois.
So what were some of your chapter's greatest successes in 2016?
We have a really, really strong Latino program. So here, especially in the city of Chicago, we have a very large Latino community. And so probably, quite a while ago we began building that group, but that group gets stronger and stronger every day. And they decided last month at their meeting that they wanted to start setting their own direction.
Do you have any ideas for what the community as a whole can do to reach more people who are Spanish-speaking?
I think one of the things we need to do is build more leaders. Our first approach was, if we just do everything, if we offer everything in English and in Spanish, we'll figure it out. And by finding leaders that, really understood the cultural issues also, we got a lot more people to come.
There's two huge takeaways from that right away. And one, obviously, is find the leaders, find the people that do the connecting and the outreach on their own, that are just natural connectors, and then listen. Listening is so important.
People are reticent to get involved if they're learning the English language. I try to always joke with them and just say, you speak English so much better than I speak Chinese, or whatever their language is, to try to get them to kind of get over that uncomfortableness of talking to me in not their first language. The moment we hear that they're not speaking our language as well as we do, we don't appear to listen. So we're not a good listening people as it is.
What were some of your greatest challenges in 2016?
I have two that I really have thought about. One is that as treatment has gotten more and more effective, it's been harder to engage young families. They oftentimes see that the medication is a pseudo cure, and they just don't learn the basics or the what ifs this medication doesn't work. Oftentimes the way we get to know these families by a crisis. Even me complaining about that crisis is I'm glad when they can call us. We've heard stories that people don't even know to call us. The other thing is the drug pipeline right now is really challenging. Everybody, because of the internet, is hearing about it every day of what is going on. So it just is kind of sitting in the seat every day trying to understand that science, but also trying to figure out a way to translate it.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like anytime there's two steps forward, there's also one step back in having to figure out how to translate those big steps forward in an actionable way. Looking ahead, what are you most excited about for 2017?
I'm really excited about the leadership our board is taking to grow BDAI. The board is really looking at what they can do to raise more money for our organization, and they're doing it in a way that I think is very smart. They are looking at growing our funding by growing our leaders. And so not only, they don't want to do this just at the board level, they want to do it across the organization. So they've created this plan to recruit what they're calling the Group of 20. It's a dream of mine that we get people to recognize that they own these organizations, and that if they're going to keep them strong and they're going to keep them alive, it's going to be because of their investments.
That's so well said. Thank you. In 2017, what challenges are you anticipating for the chapter?
The biggest challenge and the biggest worry I have right now is between the national election and the stalemate between the governor and the legislature in Illinois. Advocacy is just really stalled. We don't know what's going to occur. There's no way to plan. We have no clue, and we're not going to have a clue for 3 months to 6 months.
Everyone is talking a lot, and maybe this is the silver lining, but everyone is talking a lot about the need to unify, improve communication between chapters, improve communication and organization between advocacy groups because of the amount of work and the size of the challenge ahead. The coordination between stakeholders seems like it's going to need to improve.
By becoming more efficient, we'll all be more effective.
From your experience as a leader in your chapter, what's one thing you wish the greater bleeding disorders community would do more of or be more aware of?
This summer at the World Meeting, I was blown away to see the drive and initiative of people taking on whole countries. That there's I'm the only staff person for the entire country advocacy organization, and I work right in the clinic with the only doctor in our whole country. All of us need to understand just how lucky we are. We need to work so much more effectively together and find ways that we can be saving money instead of spending more money so that we can start offering to the rest of the world the great system that we have here. We've got to take a bigger role in the world community.
Bob, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. Thanks for including us, and have a happy holiday.
You too. Bye-bye.
Entertainment to Effect Change, or E2AC, the nonprofit organization, seeks to improve the quality of life for people with exceptional health circumstances by utilizing the strength of new media, social media, live performance, film, and art to destigmatize difference, educate on health and wellness, and inspire individuals to improve self-care and pursue fulfilling lives. Visit e2ac.org to learn more about the organization, their mission, and their work. Once again, that's e2ac.org. Thank you to everyone who participated in this month's special A Year in Review and A Year Ahead sit-down segment here on BloodStream. It is always interesting to hear the different perspectives from chapters around the country and keeping in mind our local, regional, national, and international needs as a community. There's a lot that we can learn from each other. There's a lot of differences that just have to be accounted for differently. And if we continue to talk about it and hear about it and stay curious about one another, then it stands to reason that we will be better off for it as a greater community. So thank you to everybody who participated, and thank you to Ryan Gielen for putting that segment together. And that is all for this episode. You can subscribe to BloodStream on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, or wherever you're listening. And if you have already subscribed, thank you very much. Please consider leaving us a review or sharing this podcast with others. That is how we help grow the BloodStream podcast. You can get in touch with us by email, mailbag@bloodstreampod.com. Find us on Facebook, facebook.com/bloodstreampod. Connect with us on Twitter @BloodStreamInfo, me personally @PJ Lynch, or you can now leave feedback at bloodstreampod.com/feedback. BloodStream is written by Patrick James Lynch, Natalie DeLillo, and Avra Friedman, edited by Ryan Gielen, produced by Patrick James Lynch, Ryan Gielen, Rob Bradford, Andrew Gall, Josh Bragg, and Avra Friedman, and the BloodStream podcast is edited by the incomparable Andrew Gall. Special thanks to everyone at Believe Limited, the National Hemophilia Foundation, Entertainment to Effect Change, our presenting sponsor, Stop the Bleeding, our supporting sponsor, Entertainment to Effect Change, and the Hemophilia Alliance for helping us get this podcast started. Reminder to check out the program notes for this episode in your podcast player of choice or on bloodstreampod.com for links and additional information about the various stories featured on this episode. My name is Patrick James Lynch, and until next time, until next year, take self-care of yourself.